Hello, Chameleon Wranglers. This is Bill Strand, and welcome to the Chameleon Academy podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the care that breeders give their chameleons and versus the care that keepers give their chameleons. Perhaps you've noticed that when you look at the care guides for chameleons, go to Chameleon Academy website and you're going to get some detailed care guides, and they're going to describe a certain husbandry for your chameleon. But if you look at a picture of your breeder's facility, you may be looking at that and saying, there's something different about this. Why is there a different husbandry for breeders than the keepers are told that this is the ideal husbandry that you should seek to emulate? And that's a great question, because the chameleons aren't any different. The chameleons' needs aren't any different. So why would we accept a lower grade of husbandry in the breeder setup? I mean, are we? Is that what we're doing? And I don't think it's a surprise to anybody why that is because a breeder has a large number of chameleons, and they're trying to have a breeding facility going on. And the smaller the cages, the more chameleons you can have in it. And so that brings up the question, is that a reasonable approach? And there's a lot of pros and cons. There's a lot of back and forth. But to continue this conversation, I wanted to bring on Jonathan Hill from iPardalis. He is a commercial breeder, and I'm bringing him on because he's also someone who is pushing our husbandry forward. He's making experiments. He's trying to figure out what is the best husbandry for these chameleons. And so I think he's the perfect person to come on. This upcoming segment is not an interview. It's more of a discussion where we're discussing what is the situation and where are we going. So please join me in welcoming Jonathan Hill back to the Chameleon Academy podcast. Hello, Chameleon Academy. Welcome to this episode. I have with me today Jonathan Hill. Hello, Jonathan.
Hi, Bill.
All right. We are going to be talking today about the difference between breeder care and keeper care. Generally, when you see a breeder, you see many smaller cages and perhaps more sterile cages. And when we talk about keeper care, we're talking about these large cages, heavily planted, perhaps bioactive, at least naturalistic. And the obvious question is, there's no difference between the chameleons that are in both situations. How is it we have a difference between breeder care and keeper care? And I have Jonathan Hill with me today because as the owner of iPardalis, he is a panther chameleon breeder, but he also is working on pushing our husbandry forward. And so he's the perfect person to come on and have a discussion about this. And this really isn't an interview per se. It's more of a discussion. And we're taking the breeder versus keeper care. Should there be a difference? Hello, Jonathan. Do you have any opening thoughts on this matter?
Yeah, no, I think this is a great topic to discuss because we've gotten to a point now where we know how to keep most of the common species alive. We know what the minimum is for them. And so now what we're learning is how we can make their lives better, make their lives longer, understand their behaviors, and learn. So I think as a breeder, one of the things that I get excited about with panther chameleons is that there's just so much that we don't know, even though we can keep them alive. So I find the minimum standard kind of boring to explore. I'm now interested in a lot of the other stuff. So that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, and this is important to me because I straddle both worlds. I have been a breeder before, a very active breeder, to the point where I actually created a company that made cages specifically for breeders. And the Dragon Strand breeder system was a complete rack system, so you could keep your babies separately, and you keep your adults in a nice modular setup. They could all go on racks and such. And so I was deep inside of the breeding and the mass producing, so to speak, of chameleons. But also I'm on the side of the Chameleon Academy, where I am pushing our husbandry forward and actively trying to make life better for our chameleons. And I've started to see this conflict between mass producing or producing volume of panther chameleons and pushing the husbandry forward. It's like there's kind of camps that are starting to conflict, and those two are within me. It wasn't that big of a deal back when we were trying to figure out how to breed. I remember, well, this has been a while ago. We've known how to breed panther chameleons for a while, but I remember when we were trying to figure out how to breed panther chameleons. And back in the 90s, when I got my first multi-generational breeding, I got to the second captive bred generation. That was huge. Yeah. That's huge. I mean, now, yeah, so what? We're 10 generations. Who cares? But
I would.
Okay, well, thank you. So it became. But when panther chameleon raising became a recipe, so to speak, we know how to do it. And if you become a panther chameleon breeder, your challenge is not how to keep these alive and how to breed and get your first clutch. Yeah, I know there's skill that comes with that, but we all know how to do it. And I mean, you just put the eggs in your closet and it happens. So it's become to where anybody can do it. And the skill becomes how to do it with 2 clutches of babies at once, 3 clutches of babies at once. That's the skill that's being developed here. It's not in necessarily the best husbandry. And
yeah. And well, I pretty early on wanted to do things like pay attention to mortality rates. So getting every baby to 3 months old was a point of pride. Not just half of them to 3 months old. Right. And so that, I think, by having the expectation that they all live, as was a big difference for me personally, because, it's one thing to have, like 3 or 4 males get out of a clutch of, 30 babies, which is actually pretty normal, in the community. It's another to actually see what it looks like to have a whole clutch of them develop and be healthy and things like that. So I think one of the things that we're starting to do better now is raise them individually, right? Get them out and get them thriving with their in their home. So I think that, to your point, like, it's easy to do if you can just get a couple going, and you let the have high mortality rates or other things, and you just have this expectation that this is an animal that produces a lot of babies, so they must not all be meant to live. When I hear that statement, that's something that's kind of like a red flag to me, because they have a lot of babies because some of them get eaten, not because they die randomly, or they're just weak in the wild. They're actually food for other things, and so it's not about a weakness. It's just about being predated upon, in my opinion. So that's one thing. Is like they do live if you treat them equally, and you get them all into their own enclosures, and you take good care of them. You're not going to lose very many. There's always going to be a weird kind of fluky thing that happens, but you can get the mortality rate up in the high 90s.
Well, let's talk about adults, and here's where perhaps it's more relevant to a wider swath of the community, to where if I'm going to be say I'm new and I'm going to buy a chameleon, a 3-month, 4-month-old juvenile chameleon, I'm going to go to Chameleon Academy because that's my favorite, and I'm going to take a look at this care guide. This care guide is going to tell me, keep this chameleon in at least a 2x4 foot cage. And then I go watch Bill on his video, just squirming, saying, I wish I could say larger than that because I wish it were available. And
yeah,
going through all that. So 2x4 is the minimum, bare minimum. Yet if I were to visit a breeding facility, I'm not going to see a whole lot of 2x4 foot cages for the breeding pairs. What am I to make of this situation? I thought breeders were supposed to be the ultimate in husbandry. And yeah, I've set you up because I know the answer, but
yeah, I mean, they're not is the simple answer to that. But because we all know that the 2x2x4 is a minimum. Mm-hmm. It is possible to keep them alive and healthy in a smaller space, and get them to breed. But it's not possible to get them to their max life expectancy. It's not possible to give them any kind of enrichment or the amount of enrichment that they need and other things. So I think that what you rub up against with breeders is space constraints. Like they just don't have enough space for the size of their project. And they make compromises, and they're going to keep making some people, that's not everybody, but some people are going to keep making compromises until they get punished for it. Mm-hmm. Okay, whether that be the animal not breeding or customers walking, right? Mm-hmm. So that some people are going to have that mentality of like they're going to reduce cost until they see a consequence. And then there's other breeders that are clearly interested in other things. You know, they're not just interested in minimizing cost, mm-hmm. And maximizing space. And I think that that's something that's, as a customer, as somebody in the hobby, they should try to figure out, hey, what is this breeder actually in it for? Like, what are they trying to do? And that will definitely impact their cage choices. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. So are we to accept that there is a difference between breeder care and keeper care?
No.
And so we are where we are right now. And yes, I'm asking Jonathan these questions, but I've been through this struggle here because I have a pretty large collection, which admittedly mm-hmm. right now I am trying to reduce because I've decided I'm going to listen to that podcast guy, and I am going to do everything by what I say. And it's not like I've not been doing what I say. It's I've been growing as a person and as a herpetoculturist, and I'm realizing that I am growing out of where I was 5 years ago, 8 years ago, and I still have some of those chameleons. So I still need to adjust.
Yeah,
and I need to adjust as I grow. But yeah, and I've drastically cut back on my breeding. I used to have 4 or 5 different things breeding at any one time, and babies all over, different kinds. And it took a lot of time and stuff, but I've drastically reduced mm-hmm. that because I don't want to have more babies than I have individual cages for. And because I know how much work that takes. But how does a breeder approach that? And so this is a question to the universe. How are we as breeders going to go into this new era where we're getting a much greater appreciation for chameleons as living, thinking, intelligent? They're not doing algebra, but they're definitely sentient beings. They're thinking beings. And so, and we're coming into the same thing that the snake breeders are going into. Okay, for years it's been racks, but now there's this groundswell of saying no, they need enrichment, and if they don't have enrichment, parts of their brain dies. And how is that? What are your thoughts as to how that affects us in the chameleon community?
Well, I think that it made me think about group raising and like the stress levels of neonates as they're growing. And one of the concepts that they introduced in that conversation was learned helplessness. And what that means is the animal that has been constrained in a small space and hasn't been exposed to a bunch of different things, they've learned to be helpless in that environment. They're like, there's nothing more. And they stop trying to engage that part of that brain. The brain dies away. And then they also have kind of behaviors that they start to exhibit that are abnormal because of the conditions. And I've seen a lot of animals that come out of like a group raising type situation have learned to be like friendly and docile, and then sometimes there's a conversation about how it's good. Like we want a friendly chameleon. We want one that's kind of given up on life and isn't trying to defend itself and spin and do things that chameleons should do. Whereas I've always, from the very beginning, taken pride in having an animal that still does all the normal animal things. If a predator approaches, it hides. If a predator does something that is scaring it, it's going to open its mouth and try to scare the predator back. When I see that, I take pride in that. I'm like, that animal has developed the right neural pathways to try to defend itself and to do what a chameleon should do. And that was at least one thing that I was able to say, learned helplessness. That concept is something I think I've seen in the chameleon world, where the chameleons have kind of stopped behaving like a wild animal. They've stopped behaving like their natural relatives. And some of that is captivity. And we've seen, I've talked to you about some of my wild caughts adjusting, and the way that their behaviors have changed over time. But to get to a point where they really aren't exhibiting normal behaviors because of the way that they've raised, I'd say that that's one of the things that I think we should start to recognize and try to figure out. Is that related to the way that they're being raised? Is it a personal quirk of that animal? Try to dig into that a little bit more.
I know this is going to be a difficult conversation to have, because without numbers, you can't convince anybody of that a chameleon needs enrichment.
Fair. I think, though, Bill, there's convincing is not really the goal. And I agree. Well, for you, it probably is. For me, it's not. Because for you might have the goal of convincing. For me, I want to just find people who agree and have a similar passion, because I enjoy talking to them. I enjoy working with them. And so as long as I can find those people, then I'm going to be a happy hobbyist and breeder. If there's someone who's out there doing something else, that's not really going to bother me much, because I'm just going to keep trying to search for the people that do want to engage in that conversation, and aren't going to try to try to constantly either dismiss it. I think that is the way that I would characterize it sometimes, is it's not a different argument. It's not different evidence. It's really just dismissing it out of hand. There's no attempt to even engage in the topic or the discussion.
Well, say a person who is keeping their, say, we're going to pick on panther chameleon breeders because in the chameleon community, there really isn't any other chameleon that is bred with in volume other than veiled chameleons, but that's a different situation. So I'm not picking on panther chameleon people because I have something against panther chameleon people. It's because that's the only one we've got. But so we have a number of breeders that are going to have panther chameleons in small cages, sterile cages because they're easy to clean, plastic plants because they're easy to disinfect.
Easy to clean.
All these things and they grow. They grow big. They're colorful. They mate. What more is there to life? How do we measure that there needs to be any more?
I think that is the minimum. Like that's the bare minimum is living and growing. And it kind of reminds me of the argument in the snake community where the animals were living and growing in racks just fine, right? And people who are doing it that way are pretty dead set on not changing. And so they're fighting against any conversation against it. So I'd say that's definitely a parallel. We're still learning in the chameleon community how to measure some of the cognitive differences that they talked about in Animals at Home Network and those conversations. And I think that's a conversation that we're going to have to continue to have, is like understand what are the cognitive effects. There's something to be said about it just not being natural, and we do want to use wild conditions as our guide, and plastic is pretty far from that. So as we move towards live plants and other hydration strategies and things like that, it's moving more closely to what they're actually getting in the wild, and that's to me is a good in and of itself. It's like if you have two choices and you can't measure the difference based on growth and color or anything else, but then you say, is this more natural? Is it more like their natural environment or not? I think that by itself is already a tiebreaker in the way that I think about it.
Yeah, and the way I think about it as well. But this becomes a bit of a challenge for me, especially me, because of what I do here, is because lately I have been challenged by certain groups in the community against this idea of getting more natural with husbandry. And I admit I've been shocked. I wasn't ready for that. To have such a, what are you talking about? Why are you trying to get more natural? That's ridiculous. Everything's fine. It's like, and I was really taken aback. I didn't realize that was controversial. So it's something I've been thinking about. I mean, okay.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and take the other side. Why is it? Why is it important? I'll see if you've got an answer. I've tried to answer it.
Why is it important to try to emulate their wild environment?
It's very strange to even ask that, because it's so obvious to me that is the guide for how to take care of these chameleons. If you don't have that as your reference point, what else are you?
Well, I think that you've spoken to it before, and one point is that they aren't in the wild anymore, right?
That's
so correct. We do have to make adjustments in captivity, practical adjustments in captivity. And to me, that can be a practical adjustment in captivity, or it can be an excuse for like not moving towards the natural strategy, right? You can use that's kind of, there's a pretty big window there that you can work with. And for some people, I think that the risk associated with learning or trying to improve is not worth it to them, right? So I've had some conversations with people about this where they essentially, if they've been doing it for 10 or more years, and it's like, why would I do something different if this has worked for 10 years already? Anything that somebody who's been changing their strategies and trying to learn on, they probably haven't been doing for 10 years, right? To try to compete with the other advice or ideas that are out there, right? And so that's always been an interesting thing, is like, hey, at what point do you have enough evidence and enough of an argument to convince people to change or to try it?
Yeah, and I've heard that over and over. Where's your scientific proof? And I ask, at what point are you going to say, okay, this works? Because case in point, the whole UV index of 3, that is something that started, I think, 2018, 2017, somewhere around there, with P. Hawkins doing his experiment. I then took that experiment and I showed my results. You listened to those episodes, then you took it a step further and just went through multi-generations in panther chameleons. And then Michael Nash observed all of this, and he actually did some scientific published papers on UV index and 3 and UV index 6. And okay, so now it's a scientific fact. So now everybody can jump on board. I mean, I guess you just decide at what point you want to be part of it, but everything has to start with that one seed. Yeah.
And I think that's why I was trying to get at to some degree was, you only have to convince one other person to try it, right? And then once they try it, if they can convince somebody else to do it, then it starts to spread. And even if there's someone who said no from the beginning and continues to say no, it doesn't really matter, as long as you can keep finding one or two more people to keep doing it. And eventually it becomes a scientific fact.
Yeah. Eventually becomes the standard, and the people who held out, well, they can either join now or, well, just fade into the past.
Well, they'll still be around.
Fade into the past.
but yeah, no, but you know what I mean, is that like, as long as you can convince a small number of people, that's what results in change, slowly, incrementally, and so it's not really about convincing everyone all at once. In my opinion, I think it's always about finding that next person who's going to try it out, maybe stretch it a little bit. And usually that is related to their passion, their interest, their curiosity. So if you can find people that are engaging that and work with them, then they're the ones that are going to help. And whereas there are a number of hobbyists out there versus the breeders who, when they hear the minimums, they are really trying to minimize cost related to this project and minimize effort, especially if they think of it as just kind of one of their pets, and they just kind of want to do the minimum with their pet. I also, when I hear that that's what they're doing, it's kind of like, well, how much can you influence that person as well? Because they're going to use the recipe, right? They're just going to use the recipe to the bare minimum because that's what they're doing, and it's tough to influence that type of situation.
Okay. Well, let's talk about if we took away and you before you said perhaps maybe Bill, you're trying to convince people, and the reason why this is important to me, where I am in this podcast, Chameleon Academy, is that I see the whole us moving forward as a community, and breeders are a cornerstone of that. We absolutely need the breeders because the breeders produce the captive hatch individuals that other people, the community, can grow around. So the more captive hatched, the bigger our community can be. Because we don't want the community to deal with wild caught animals. So we need the breeders. They are a cornerstone of our community. So they need to come with the community. And as I've alluded to, I've been a little frustrated that it seems the breeders tend to be holding the community back as far as going forward because, and there's some reasons behind that. If you are a breeder and you have a system set up for your entire process, you're not going to want to change it. And I mean, you're going to risk your entire setup because you want to go with the latest thing. I wouldn't want to do that.
Well, I can say for one of the things that I've wanted to do for years now and haven't been able to do yet is to use fog everywhere in all of my enclosures, right? I've been listening to the research, listening to the conversations related to different hydration strategies, and I added fog to some enclosures, a small number, to try it out and to think about how to scale it. But practically speaking, it was, by the time I heard about it, I already had 200 enclosures set up, and adding fog to 200 enclosures was not a simple thing to try to do. And even though I agree with it, and I say, like, I think it's a great thing for people to do, it's something that I'm still trying to figure out for myself as a breeder.
Yeah, and we got a lot of cages. It's tough. I haven't even turned all of my cages into the whole fogging situation. It's a big thing. But what I see this as three things that are interconnected, and they kind of all have to move together at once. And one is the breeder being willing to upgrade all of their setup for husbandry reasons, for the quality of life for their chameleon, but they can't do that because their competition is not worrying about quality of life of the chameleon. They're keeping their chameleons in sterile boxes, and so you're now at a competitive disadvantage. So, and it's more expensive to do that. So, well, maybe not, but I think it's fair to say, let's just say, it's more expensive to add a fogger and have this missing system. And so you're adding equipment. So the breeder is saying, why would I add all of that in when that will just be a disadvantage to me business-wise? Okay, yeah, I can feel good that the chameleons are now enriched because they've got plants, but I'm not going to be around long because my competitor is going to be out competing me. Unless the community recognizes the value of that and is willing to pay what it takes to do that, and is, I won't say punishing, but is going away from the cheaper chameleons. And oh my goodness, that getting somebody away from price, that's a real tough one. But I see that the community has to demand it and be willing to pay for it so the breeders can reduce the numbers that they breed and still be able to support what they're doing. And at the same time, that all has to be done in the face of people who are willing to do it, who cut the corners and sell it for cheaper. And so that's a tough nut to crack when you have those different pieces all having to work together.
It is. I do think though that as new topics, like new ideas, start to become expected at parts of husbandry, live plants, fogging, cage sizes, all these types of parameters that we know are good for our chameleons. There is competition among breeders in that area as well. Like because product quality is going to be impacted by those parameters. And I think that although you can get away with it, technically get away with it, you're not going to be able to argue that your animal is the top quality out there while doing that as well. So I think that there is competition there, and I know that as you introduce topics and you talk about them on your podcast, you can watch the breeder community and you see some people try to voice that's what they're doing that too, and whatever it is.
Great.
So you see on the sales side of it, people using that information to try to make sales. And I think that that's a positive thing.
Yeah,
I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's great.
That's a good thing.
Which leads us to the next question. You were perhaps the first breeder to wrap your message around individually raised panther chameleons. You put it in the name, iPardalis, for individually raised. And so I don't, if people were doing it, I know I've been talking about it since before 2013, but I don't know of anybody who before you that embraced it so much that they were willing to step out and say, this is a selling point. And I believe in it so much. And since then, the question is, how has that been accepted by the community?
It's there's a number of people who have started to do it. Okay. And I think that's great to see people competing in that way. It's like, I've been seeing other people now do it, and this is incredible. Yeah. This is great.
But with the customers, have you seen the customers respond with, okay, I see the value in someone who does this?
Not too many, to be honest. But because customers come and go, right? And depending on who they are, they might just be interested in one chameleon as a pet, and or they're older and more serious hobbyists, then they're more likely to care about that. But I would say the biggest changes I've seen is people seeing that as a reason that they chose to get a chameleon from me, and then sometimes if they want to go and breed them, they'll do the same thing. They'll go and get a bunch of individual enclosures. They have one pair of panthers, and then they've got a full rack ready to go for their first clutch. And I think that's cool. I've seen that now at least a dozen times.
Although I do know that you've been accused of selling older chameleons and calling them younger.
Oh yeah. It's that happened pretty quick. I think that was my first clutch. Yeah. The first individual clutch, everyone was like, those must be 5 months old. And I mean, there's pushback. There's people accusing me of saying that they're older than they are, or things like arguing that they tried it and it didn't have an impact. But I think now they can't say that because I've done so many clutches that it's pretty clear that that's how fast they grow, and that is actually how old they are. The other thing that I did to try to compete with that response was to just put pictures up on the website and not take them down. So like all of my past clutches are up there, and I just keep doing that. Every time I have a clutch, I take all the pictures of the babies and I put them in a gallery on the website, and then I just keep going. And at some point when people want to say something and they don't have 7 generations of evidence documented in the way that I do, it doesn't really matter what they say. Yeah. So that's kind of the way that I've thought about it. It's like, yeah, I'll just keep going, and they can say what they want.
Well, I see you as being one of the most instrumental people who has furthered the idea of individual raising and made that and proved it out. I mean, I can do it and I can say it's happening, but everybody else can say, no, it's not. No, it's not. But, and so what is the person who is who's just in the community? What do they think? Oh, okay, these got 2 experienced people, and they're conflicting arguments there. What do I do? But you're the one who's actually done it for generation after generation with the evidence up there. So you've done an incredible job proving this out, that, better husbandry actually results in a better product, a better chameleon. And I'm looking for the next step as to how we're going to get, my vision, so to speak, is small batch breeders. I'm sorry, you were going to say what?
No, I was going to say the next thing could be someone who's heard this hydration discussion and they build from the very beginning, build their infrastructure with that in mind. Yeah. 'Cause I know I had a huge advantage over people who already had either too many clutches, and it was hard for them to think about all the infrastructure that would be required to do individual raising. And so by starting with that expectation and saying, hey, this is how I'm going to pace myself, this is how much space I need to scale at the pace that I am, and things like that, all of those things come into play, and it's the new people that have a chance to take advantage of this information and scale the right way.
Yeah, and I think that is the most important message from this episode, this talk here, is that for the person, if you out there are thinking about starting a breeding project, you have the opportunity to start with the latest in husbandry. You can start with the latest of what we know, and that's an advantage. The breeders who are already established, they can't change their infrastructure. It's so expensive. And don't let yourself be held back by someone who built their breeding facility 10, 15, 20 years ago and just built up and kept replicating that and got really good at that. Don't let that be an anchor to keep you from being the next generation breeder. Yeah. And I am hoping and that the landscape of breeders changes to people being more interested in what we call small batch breeding. I saw that on Animals at Home, and I just love that. Where you only have a couple of pairs, but you're keeping them as if they were pets, and you're only going to have 2-3 clutches a year, and they are individually kept, and they are kept to the best husbandry, not to keep them alive, breathing, and growing, but more towards their mind being enriched. And someone's got to say, what does that mean? We're working on it. How do I quantify or put numbers to enrichment? And we're having, I mean, we're on the cusp of trying to figure out what enrichment means for a chameleon. Does it mean a wildly flying insect? Does it mean the different naturalistic plants within the enclosure? It's kind of difficult because when a chameleon's happy, it doesn't do much. So yeah, we've got a little bit of a challenge, but that's our job here, is to figure that out. So
yeah,
I'm hoping that smaller breeders can take this
focus
and say,
more
okay,
time on that.
I've got two to four pairs of chameleons, and I am going to breed them on a schedule. So, I mean, yeah, good luck scheduling panther chameleons when they want to give you a second clutch, and then all those clutches sink, and then so yeah, there's all sorts of risk in trying to schedule out your breeding. But to be able to have a small batch breeding situation like that, and you can show off that the adults are kept in these beautiful pet quality cages. I'd like to see that being rewarded by the community, saying, "Hey, I like that better than smaller sterile cages."
To some degree, it should just be what people want to do. It's like it's more fun. So I've always thought about it that way too, Bill. Like, I don't want to do something that's not interesting and that isn't beneficial to them, right? Because part of the reason I got into animals from day one was because they're so cool. They're so interesting. They're fun. I was that kid running outside, finding animals all day before school. And that's what it is to me now too, is a way to continue to learn. And when you get into a situation where you have too many and you're just trying to keep it clean, it's no fun, right?
Yeah, it does become a lot more work than, somewhere along the way, it became more work than fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that.
And exactly. And that's, to me, is the point where you should probably try to scale it back and get back to the roots of why you're doing it to begin with, which is to learn and to have fun.
And I would like to, I guess, I want to say this before it leaves my head. I am talking about wanting to change our breeding situation, but I also want to make it clear, this is not for everybody out there to start dogpiling on any breeder that's out there right now who is doing things the way we have been doing them with smaller sterile enclosures. Yeah. That entire foundation is what got us where we are. That was a necessary growth point for us, and those breeders are the reason why we're here right now. And we need to respect that. It's not like you just snap a finger and says, okay, we know better, and so you do it. You all got to change. This is going to be a slow progression, and it should be a slow progression, because these are great ideas, but how do you actually translate that into a real working business?
Yeah.
You can't, those of us with great ideas, okay, that's where it starts, but we can't snap it into existence. All of those things that I talked about have to come along as well. You have to have the market, the customers agree that this is important. And then they have to be supporting the breeders and giving the breeders reason to change, also the financial support to change. And so,
yeah,
I mean, even if you've got a breeder who says, like Jonathan just said, yeah, I really love that fogging thing, but I can't just switch over. I mean, it's an immense amount of work, and it is. I've been trying to do switching it over. It's an immense amount of work to change all that infrastructure. And so you don't all of a sudden say, all right, I'm not going to buy from anybody that isn't fogging. That's absolutely not what I'm saying here. What I
Yeah.
would like to see is that let's be patient. If you're starting breeding facility, start with the latest technology and the latest that we know in husbandry. And I'll work on the education. I'll work on, my part. Everybody's got to do it, but I'll do my part in saying, okay, this is what's important. And so the customer base will see the value in that. They will support the new breeders, and we will make this slow transition. But don't go out there and start harassing the breeders that are there right now. That's not going to do any good. That's not good at all.
Well, I think it does some good.
All right. Then again, Jonathan's going to come in, and I'd like to listen to this. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, in the because I've had people harass me.
I was trying to be a nice guy, but go ahead.
No, but seriously, I mean, this is part of being a breeder. I don't think. I mean, if you don't like being harassed, you probably shouldn't do breeding. But I had somebody challenge me probably about 2 years ago when the first year that I had babies consistently, basically all the time. I had babies on hand and had chameleons available consistently throughout the year. And I had somebody get mad at me about something kind of unrelated and then tell me that I run a puppy mill and they used it as an insult. We were talking about like something totally different, and then they just threw puppy mill at me as an insult. And I was like, it made me stop and think. And I know that some people probably just get mad and they get like try to defend what they're doing, but it made me wonder, like, how is what I'm doing different from a puppy mill? Because they called it that, and I was like, how do I defend this? And it engaged me in that thought, and I think that's good. And I don't think that, like, in the moment I was angry that they called. I was like, no, I'm doing all these things better, and I put all this effort into what I'm doing, and it felt insulting, right? But I remember it today, years later, and I, in some ways, am glad that they said that, because it forced me to think, like, what could I do better? How could I be different from a puppy mill so that if someone says that, then I have a good answer for why it isn't. And so, as much as I don't think it's a good thing to go out and attack people randomly, I've always been optimistic about the way that those types of engagements result in some kind of change, or at least a thought, like a moment where someone is like, "Hey, I can't be subject to that attack. I have to have a good defense to that." And if that results in, people using more live plants or raising individually or whatever the response is, then in my mind, it's like, hey, that's good, but.
Well, my point, which by the way, yes, what you're saying is true. So this isn't a but, this is a parallel conversation here.
Yeah.
What I was getting at is that we will enact change with our wallet.
True.
There's a lot of, it's very easy to talk online and to be all self-righteous and talk about this is the right way to do it. But if you then go and pay the cheapest breeder for the cheapest panther chameleon because you're a shrewd customer, all of those words are useless.
Yeah.
It is the only thing that's going to make change is your wallet and how you make your spending decisions. And I mean, it's the same thing with captive bred versus wild caught. And this was something that I was doing in the 90s, where I would be willing to pay $250 for a captive hatched Daramensis when I could have spent $75 to get a wild caught.
For the wild caught.
That's talking, it doesn't
With your
matter
money.
what I say online if I went and bought the wild caught.
Exactly.
So, if you want a panther chameleon that is cared for better, then find the breeders that do it and then pay their price. Don't shop on price, shop on quality. And keep saying that, but that's the way it's going to happen.
It is. And I think that the sterile versus bio debate is one for raising babies, is one that we still need to learn more about.
Yeah.
Right. We still need people to go out and collect good data, run it in parallel and collect good data, understand what the impact is, and share it with the community. So I hope more people start to push on that. Like, I know that I've been trying a bunch of different setups for the individual raised babies. I have some that are sterile. I have some that are live planted, and I have some that are fully bioactive with soil and everything. And I have a combination because I want to try to learn what the difference is. And I think that we're still in a place where we don't really know the answer. Like we're still trying to learn on some of that stuff. So if someone comes and tries to, it's like someone comes and tries to attack us on it.
Yeah, individually raised, I know that is solid.
Helps.
You've got to do it. That is the best husbandry. But as for raising up a baby, I don't know either. I've done it so many different ways and still working on what would I recommend would be the best. And as you know, I'm starting a new clutch now, and I'm going to be doing one in a leak bioactive, one in an outdoor small cage. I'm going to do one in a 2x2 by 4 foot cage outdoors, and then two of them are going to be in 16 by 16 by 30 inch cages. I mean, as in two different ones, not together. and so I'm going to be trying all these different. And you know what? I don't know that I'm going to find anything out. They may all grow the same way. And so, but I guess that's a data point too.
It is. And I think that that's where we are, though, right? Yeah. We're beyond just getting them to grow. So it's going to be looking at some other details and trying to get data on some of the other things, maybe related to their behavior and mating behavior. Panthers is not going to be great because they're just going to mate regardless of what you do. But if we had another species to try, maybe you could get better data on that. But you know what I mean? It's like we're going to have to try to see a little bit more than just how fast they grow. Yeah, well, I'm thinking about folks, I'm not going to tell you to do this. I do it, but don't do it. But having a fully planted 2x2 by 4 foot enclosure outdoors, I don't know that I'm ever going to see this little guy. So, I'll get back to you in 4 months when I actually see him. He gets big enough. He's easy to find. But I'll have a feeding station. They always find the feeding station. I raised a couple outside last year in some of my outdoor enclosures. Okay. And they did very well. They grew comparable rates to the ones that were inside. So yeah, I'm just worried about spiders. they tend to get... Yeah. I hear, whenever I hear about the types of insects and other things that you guys have down where it's hot all year round, these different beasts. Yeah, those little spiders can get in and then they grow and then they become. So I need to make sure about my panther chameleon grows faster than any spider that can crawl in as a baby. So it's a race against time there. So absolutely. But I guess one thing for this discussion, though, about breeder standards versus keeper standards. I see it as the standard is the same. It is always about the animal, right? And about their health, about their longevity, and that's really all that matters in the end. So I think that the reason it's challenging sometimes to argue when there's a bunch of different ways to achieve a healthy outcome for the animal is that we are in a really good place as a community. Like we do have that recipe to some degree. And so sometimes I feel like, stepping back from these debates and kind of just saying, okay, I'm passionate about one thing, they're passionate about another thing. It's okay. Mm-hmm. Like it's fine. And we're, like years from now, and you can say this even better than me, it's like years from now, you're going to see the same people. And sometimes it's the same debates. Sometimes it's new debates, and I enjoy it. Personally, I think it's fun. And I hope that everybody who gets involved has fun with this stuff. They engage in these debates, they develop an opinion, because that's what I like to see. And that's kind of like, that's what makes it fun, a fun hobby to be a part of, and a fun community to join. So, I hope that people don't get too crazy, like it's because we're all just chameleon nerds at the end of the day, right?
Hey, everybody's going to get crazy. What are you talking about?
which is a cool thing. Like, how many chameleon nerds do you meet any day, right? Every day, right? So like that to me is important to remember. It's like, we're the same people.
Yeah. And, there's no easy answers. I guess I'll close up my side by saying we're at the start of the conversation here as to how we integrate what we're calling keeper husbandry, or these husbandries, into the breeding situation. And so there's no definitive answer here. It's not like we can all decide that someone's good and someone's bad, and we can all dogpile on the bad person. There is no bad person here. There isn't a black and white here. This is just a discussion that we all need to have, and we all need to think about and keep moving the community forward. And all I can say is I look forward to bringing Jonathan back on 10 years from now and saying, hey, what have we done? Let's take a look back at what's gone on in the last 10 years. See where we are. Oh,
yeah, absolutely.
Well, Jonathan,
I would enjoy that.
Is there anything more you'd like to say to close this off?
No, I hope if anybody hears something that we're talking about on we talked about today, and they're working on something related to this conversation, to reach out, get in touch. I'd be happy to chat about it, and to learn more about what you're doing. So
yeah, and I think that's really important. If you're starting, or if you want to take on a project, help us move forward. Help us figure out all of these things. And when you're listening to the Chameleon Academy, much of these things are new. A lot of the things that I'm talking about weren't really around in their current form back when I started. And so we're all growing together. And I love having this podcast because it's been a tool for that growth, and it's been able to bring community members together, and we can share results. And so there aren't a whole lot of black and whites here, and so we're all just growing. And so I encourage you, pick something here and try it, and then report back, because this is pretty exciting. There's a lot of stuff to learn here. So we are, and I think it's, not to go off on another tangent, but I just think we're in a great place because I lived through the area where the time where chameleons were 6-month animals. And it was just, I remember when it was such an accomplishment to keep a chameleon for a couple of years and to then get to breeding them. It was amazing. Breeding them multi-generations. Whoa. And we're to the point now where we're talking about, okay, how do we get rid of the microstresses? How do we get them to live longer? What is their genetic life potential? These are amazing questions. And so if you're starting right now, you're in an amazing time. Take advantage of it and help us go further. I'm just really excited where we are. All right, we will close this off. Everyone, thank you very much for joining Jonathan and I here. And we will see you all in the interwebs. All right. See you later, Jonathan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.
All right, so there you go. There's a lot to think about there. And I think the one thing that I really want you to take away from this is that you have the power to change the community. What you are willing to do with your wallet dictates what breeders will do. And so we have the ability to go into an era of our chameleon history to where the breeders will be taking just as good care of their breeding stock as keepers do. And that also translates out to people with large collections. Yeah, you want to have 20, 30 chameleons. Well, how are you taking care of those? Do you have 20 to 30 2x2 by 4 foot cages? Or are you now using your experience to keep chameleons in smaller cages? And is that valid? Because I know once you get to a certain level of expertise and you understand the lighting, the heating, the hydration, you can keep a chameleon in a smaller container. It's amazing what containers you can keep a chameleon in. You can keep them growing and by all appearances, healthy. So does that mean that is acceptable husbandry? And that the answer to that question may be on a different level. There's a number of levels here. But what I do want to say is that it's time for us to think about these things. Us as a community, where do we want to go? And what do we want to present as acceptable husbandry? It is important that we have these discussions and we decide what we as a community want to encourage. Remember, we do not live on an island here. There are people all around us, from the reptile community, from outside the reptile community, that are looking at what we do. And if we police ourselves, we manage ourselves, and we push ourselves to give the best lives to our chameleons, then there are much fewer things that can be pointed out as to, see, this is what's wrong with the community. And there are people out there, not part of the reptile community, that would love to see reptile keeping taken away. And the best chance that we have to defend against that is to show that we are taking care of these animals. They're not being used as toys. They're not being abused. They're being given the respect that a living creature deserves. And so this is why it's important that we have these discussions and we keep moving our husbandry forward in a way that shows that we're not treating these chameleons as black boxes that we just move back and forth for our business needs. And the fact is that the people with the money are the ones that control where we go. And the people with the money are you. You're the ones who are deciding who you're going to buy baby chameleons from. And if you save your purchase dollars for the breeders that you research and say, yeah, they've got great husbandry, they're taking care of their adult breeders, they're individually raising their baby chameleons, this is the quality care that I want my breeder to give their chameleons, and I am going to patronize this particular breeder. Even though there's a breeder over here who's selling it for much cheaper because they don't care as much. And we all know wherever the money goes, that is where the community goes. So if the breeders with the best care are getting the customers, then more breeders with that kind of care will show up. It's just the way the world works. And so I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Jonathan Hill. This is something that I will continue to be looking at and discussing, and you're welcome to come along with me as we explore the future of chameleon husbandry. Thank you very much for spending the time to watch this show. If you'd like to talk more about this topic or any other chameleon topic, I have live sessions throughout the week. You can come with me and the chameleon community and we talk about this. I have a live session on Instagram on Tuesday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific, and then I have another one on YouTube at 12 noon on Saturday. That's 12 noon Pacific. We have a great crowd that shows up and we have a lot of fun and we talk chameleons. So bring your comments, bring your questions, or just drop on by and enjoy the banter. Take care of yourself and that wonderful chameleon of yours, and I will see you next time.